Today is Nicholas Danforth, a senior fellow for the German Marshall Fund. His focus is U.S.-Turkish relations, and this is what we will be talking about. Welcome,
Indeed.
Nick.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Would you like to speak in Turkish? I know you speak.
No, no, please.
Okay. I think we start with the latest. As you know, Turkey and Russia seem to be on a collision course these days because of Idlib. And back in September, I suppose I remember reading a column titled, "U.S. can use Syria to win Turkey back from Russia." Right. I mean, isn't it the time? Are there still interests, or there is a room for working together for them?
No, there are certainly people in D.C. who've said all along that at some point the Turkish-Russian relationship will break down, and that will be the United States' moment to step in and win back Turkey. I guess this is the moment we'll see whether or not that's true. I'm skeptical. This entire time, I think, while some of the propaganda, while some of the rhetoric coming out of Ankara certainly sounded naive, it certainly made it sound like Turkey had wild hopes for what the relationship with Russia would bring. At the end of the day, I think you had people who were thinking through this more carefully, who recognized that the alliance with Russia wasn't going to be perfect, who recognized that it was going to have limits, who recognized that Russia was ultimately going to stand with Assad, and who at various points in the past made the calculation to work with Russia because they saw the United States as a bigger threat, because they saw the United States' behavior in Syria as a bigger threat than Russia's behavior in Syria. And I think until that worldview changes, until that broader calculation changes, events like this won't necessarily change the broader course of Turkish foreign policy.
Oh, and so let me ask you this then, maybe. Do you expect the tensions between Turkey and Russia to escalate now? I mean, or will, as we see in the back, other times, will Putin give in to the demand? Because Erdogan said, give Bashar Assad a warning,
Right.
What do you think?
So far, it looks like Russia's approach has been fairly consistent, both vis-a-vis other rebel groups and in Idlib. There's an escalation, there's increased pressure, there's increased bombing. That serves as a pretext to negotiate a new ceasefire that wins the regime more territory. That in this case would result in possibly Turkey withdrawing beyond the M4 and M5 highways. That new ceasefire lasts for a while, and then at a certain point when the politics and the military situation is right, Russia and the regime continue their offensive, put more pressure on be it the rebels, be it Turkey, and then that serves, then we get another crisis like the one we have now, and then that leads to another ceasefire in which the opposition loses even more territory. And nothing we've seen so far suggests that this pattern will change.
But you also, in Twitter, you wrote that the more this escalates, the more Moscow will be forced to prioritize as well. But, every time, Moscow said give in to Turkey's demands, for example, or as we have seen ceasefire, Moscow gets something from Turkey, we know that. So, I mean, do you see really Moscow leaving Turkey, losing its plans, about Turkey? Because Moscow must be very happy to have Turkey because it gives a break-in in the NATO or something like that, don't you think so? And Turkey sends U.S. troops out of, in a way, from Syria.
No, exactly, and I do think that makes it difficult for Russia. I mean, this isn't an unqualified win for them. Their goal has always been to help Assad win back all of Syria while also wooing Turkey away from NATO and the West. And to the extent that Turkey and Assad come into conflict with each other, it makes it difficult for Russia to do both of those at the same time. And yet, to the extent I understand the potential logic behind Erdogan's escalation right now, it does seem like part of what he's saying is, we're willing to work with you, we want to work with you, we want to have a good relationship with you, but there are certain limits. It's raising the cost of ignoring Turkey's interests. I think he's trying to tell Russia that you can't take back all of Idlib and still keep Turkey on your side. It's possible that Russia will gamble that it can. It's possible that Russia will gamble that Turkey has already sufficiently alienated NATO, that Russia can continue to put pressure on Turkey, and that ultimately Turkey will decide to back down, to continue backing down, rather than really completely withdraw from the Astana process, risk confrontation with Russia and Syria directly.
And is there anything, because Russia and Turkey are at odds regarding Libya as well, and is there any stake for United States in Libya, or can they help Turkey out there? Do you think so? Or?
No, and this is a good point that I think is worth making as well. It's not, the other challenge with the United States using this to win back Turkey is that there's no evidence anyone on the US side has thought through or is prepared to do what it would take to actually help Turkey in this situation. You know, you imagine if Ankara came to the United States and said, we're willing to send back the S-400s if you can help bail us out in Idlib. I don't think this administration would not, you can't imagine them coming up with a coherent policy and saying, yes, this is what we will do to save the situation in Idlib. That presence of mind, that political vision is not there in Washington anymore. I'd say the same about Libya. I mean, we don't even know what the United States' Libya policy is. Nominally, the United States, like Turkey, is on the side of the GNA in Tripoli. And yet you had a conversation between Trump and Haftar in late 2019, I think, where Trump made it very clear that he liked Haftar, and if Haftar ended up taking Tripoli, it seems like Trump would be fine with that. Oh, so I don't...
You don't expect anything?
Yeah, I don't think, unfortunately, the United States, even if there were an opportunity to win back Turkey, would be in a position to capitalize on it right now.
Oh, so how about the other cases? I mean, we know that because Turkey relies heavily on Mr. Trump, you know, and so far he was good at, for example, making the Katsa thing, you know, the sanctions being delayed. He was good at it. Right. And other things are coming out. What do you expect? Because also the elections are getting, yes, you know, nearer. So yes, can he do something in the sense that in those areas about Turkey's problems with the United States? I mean, for example, Halkbank case.
Right. No, so let me be the first to say Turkey's strategy of putting all its hope in Trump to save U.S.-Turkish relations and overcome the disastrous image that Turkey has in every other branch of the United States government has so far worked out more successfully than I expected it to. As you say, on the case of Halkbank, Trump was very eager to delay the next round of prosecution. In the case of the S-400, right, Trump has put off sanctions for, you know, going on 6 months longer than we expected. That said, it's still not clear how much longer this approach can last for. And we are, you know, again, even with the S-400 sanctions, for example, to the extent that the United States Senate has been willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt and hasn't pushed ahead with its own sanctions, that's been in the hope that some kind of compromise can be reached. That's been in the hope that an agreement can be reached where Turkey doesn't activate the S-400s in April as it's promising.
So in a way, the ball is on Turkey's court now.
I think the ball is on Turkey's court, and I think if Turkey did go ahead and activate the S-400s, there would be very little. Trump could do. The Senate would take action, just as we ultimately saw with the Halkbank case. You know, Trump put it off for a long time. Now the Southern District of New York is moving forward. Halkbank is facing massive fines for refusing to cooperate. Again, the strategy worked better than I thought, but it could come at a heavy cost.
Okay, then let's talk about the elections, upcoming elections.
Yes.
I mean, do you think Trump will win? Is it so obvious? Because, you know, when you look at it from here, it looks like it's, you know, a high probability that he will win. Do you think so?
Look, I used to be optimistic that he wouldn't win. Whenever I told my Turkish friends I thought Trump might lose, they tended to look at me with that same kind of condescending look that I gave them when they told me that Muharrem İnce was definitely going to win.
Okay.
I mean, I tried to stay optimistic. I'm less optimistic now, but we'll see. At the end of the day, when it comes to elections, what I think in both Turkey and the US the last few years have proven is that no one has any idea. what's going to happen.
So how is he doing with the, because tomorrow the Senate will make him, what was the word for it? In Senate
Right.
tomorrow they will vote, and he will be staying in his office for a while as well. I mean,
It does seem unlikely he'll be removed from office by the Senate.
So afterwards, will the Senate or regarding the Mideast policy will be on the agenda upcoming 9 months? How will things go on? Because there are obviously some different views. For example, Democrats, especially, of course, they are trying to win also the election, so they are going after Trump in every way. But with the Middle East policy, do you expect anything, for example, escalation in the Iranian situation, or will he do war?
No, that's a fantastic question, and I was recently, specifically about how this relates to Turkey, talking to two people who both understand U.S. Senate dynamics much better than I do. And it was fascinating. They both had very different reads on what the impeachment might mean for U.S.-Turkish relations. One person was making the case that if, obviously Republican senators are going to support Trump on impeachment. One possibility is that while supporting Trump on impeachment, for political reasons, they want to show that they're not completely beholden to him. They want to show that they're a little bit independent. Mm-hmm. And so one person I was talking to was suggesting that they might, that say, moving forward on the CAATSA sanctions, taking more aggressive action towards Turkey might be a way of, while supporting Trump on impeachment, showing that they disagree with him on other things, showing that they're independent. The other person was making the opposite case, which is that when Trump was seen as under attack by the Democrats, if the Democrats started using Trump's withdrawal from Syria or his softness towards Erdogan as political issues against Trump, then it would force Republicans, even those who didn't support his policies, to side with him, and ultimately end up supporting Turkey because they wanted to support Trump.
Okay.
Now, let me add one more thing, which could be interesting. John Bolton is coming out with a new book.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to be in it. John Bolton was one of the few people who I believe made some comments after the Syria withdrawal suggesting, unclear what the evidence was, that Trump himself was actually beholden to Turkey in some way, that he was financially or personally beholden to Erdogan. So again, true or not, if those allegations are in the book, that would add a new political dimension to U.S.-Turkish relations.
Maybe more pressure for Trump.
Yes.
Yes. And how about the East Mediterranean issue? Because that's a very important issue, I think, for many people, powerful people in Washington, I suppose. It's not like Syria, maybe, but it's much more important because it relates to Israel as well. All the
Greece, exactly.
Yes,
no, I mean, Greece and Israel obviously are two countries that have powerful lobbies in Washington.
Exactly.
And no, my concern specifically on the Eastern Mediterranean issue is that as this escalates, or let's optimistically say if this escalates, and as the crisis deepens, you would have a situation both where, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt become more tightly locked in an alliance against Turkey, and the United States, because of its domestic and geopolitical alignments, would find itself increasingly siding with Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and Egypt against Turkey. Yeah. And my fear, not only in the short term is this problematic and would create a deepening U.S.-Turkish crisis, but more specifically in the long run, if you imagine hypothetically a future Turkish government, different political actors come to power in Turkey, even if they wanted to reset relations with the United States, even if a future government wanted to reset relations with, let's say, Greece, let's say Egypt, to the extent that this bloc of countries had come to define itself, had come into existence in opposition to Turkish interests in the Eastern Mediterranean, my fear is that that would make it increasingly difficult for any Turkish government to reset relations with Turkey and with the United States and with its neighbors. That this would become a permanent rift.
That's very important what you say.
I mean, I think it's a serious concern that I don't think people in Washington are taking seriously enough.
And so then, do you think there might be a time when United States choose over that bloc over Turkey? Because we are always thinking that strategically we are a very important country. I mean, how serious our strategic importance for?
No, and this is also what I worry about. That I mean, since 1952, since Turkey and Greece joined NATO, preventing Turkish-Greek clashes, maintaining the unity of the alliance, maintaining stability in the Eastern Mediterranean, has been an overriding concern for for U.S. governments. An issue that they've struggled with often, even when NATO was stronger, when you had more attuned U.S. administrations. Now I think you have a lot less focus in Washington. You have a lot less resources to try to manage this crisis. You have, as we talked about, you have a Congress which is willing to or able to drive forward foreign policy. I mean, as it did after 1974, it's willing to drive foreign policy in a pro-Greek direction. But now you don't have an administration that's able to balance that. You don't have an administration that's able to see the broader picture. As if I understand it, in the case of Imre Kardak, when the crisis broke out, Bill Clinton got on the phone, called up Tansu Çiller, called up, I don't know who the Greek prime minister was at the time, and helped resolve the crisis. And if there was a similar crisis now, it's a lot harder to imagine Trump playing that role. And so I worry, I think people in the United States do recognize Turkey's importance. People in the United States, if given the opportunity, have been very concerned about this risk of losing Turkey. But the fear is that as relations got worse, as Turkey seemed from Washington's point of view to be a more difficult actor, the United States could slip into a pro-Greek position that would be hard to get out of. And you're already seeing things like as concerns about the U.S. being forced to leave Incirlik Air Base, for example, mount. That's leading the Pentagon to improve relations with Greece, to invest more in air bases in Greece, to invest more in naval bases in Greece. This isn't a conscious policy of preferring Greece over Turkey. This is an attempt to hedge America's strategic interests. This is an attempt to be cautious, to make long-term plans, but the result is a closening U.S.-Greek alliance that has consequences for the U.S.-Turkish alliance.
Okay, so to close up, I mean, you don't expect much improvement in before the elections. Do you expect it? I mean, or because we cannot know what Trump can do.
No, and it's been exactly. I mean, and I worry, my fear is if there was an improvement, it would come for the worst possible reasons. I mean, we were talking after the U.S. strike on Qasem Soleimani, if the United States, heaven forbid, ended up with a war with Iran, in some perverse way, that could result in better U.S.-Turkish relations, but it would still be in a way that's bad for everyone.
Right.
Similarly, if, in the best-case scenario, the current regime offensive in Idlib produces some, minor improvement in U.S.-Turkish relations, that will come at a disastrous humanitarian cost. That will come at a disastrous cost for both the U.S. and Turkish regional interests.
I said last, but let me ask you. I mean, how about the Kurds? I mean, YPG, SDG.
We didn't even get into it. That's true. This is the longest conversation I've had without the YPG coming up.
Yeah, why?
At all. That's crazy.
Why? How is the relationship with U.S.? I mean, or U.S. just said, we don't deal with you anymore, and just we will be protecting the oil there. What were they doing, the Americans in Syria?
No, and this is why I don't think anyone knows. I mean, Trump, yes, I think Trump thinks U.S. forces are there to protect the oil. I think U.S. forces think they're there to fight ISIS and indirectly provide political support for the Kurds as they try to negotiate some kind of improved relationship with the regime in Russia. But no, and as the situation in Idlib escalates, that could create a whole new dynamic between the regime and the YPG. Wow. So, with 30 seconds left, we're not going to...
Okay, so, I mean...
Not that I have a good answer anyway, so I'm glad we're out of time.
We will be talking again, hopefully.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for watching us.